This committee of the whole is going to resume. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just one additional question, if I may. I know we were previously discussing the numbers, and the presentation by the Guard was very clear. The presentation by DPW in terms of their requirements is clear. There were some concerns that I had with regards to the information provided by the Emergency Operations Center, by Civil Defense, in regards to how the numbers were generated. So I'll just leave it at that. But I have one additional question, Mr. Chair, with regards to, and this will be directed to Mr. Burns, the Recycling Revolving Fund. Is there any anticipated carryover or cash available in that fund?
Senator, there is some cash in that fund, but not as much as in the funds that we have previously spoken about.
I understand. That wasn't my question. Okay, so what is your cash balance in that account?
It's $952,000.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. And Mr. Chairman, I bring that up specifically because some of the requirements are being presented is that approximately $250,000 is needed by DPW, specifically for green waste disposition. And then also there was another figure that was provided by Mr. Esteves with regards to white goods and metallic waste being disposed of. And that figure, I believe, that was provided by Mr. Esteves was?
100,000.
100,000. And if we are going to try to remain as focused in terms of the utilization of any of these funds, special funds, then the Recycling Revolving Fund, which has approximately $972,000 in cash, could be used to address just those two specific requirements, which is 150,000 plus 250. So I believe that would be a sufficient figure, because the mandate under the Guam Recycling Fund is specifically for the disposition of trash and for recycling activities. So that would be an impending amendment with regards to that. And I hope that there's no major concerns, unless you do have some concerns with regards to that. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? And if there's none, I'm going to go ahead and release the panel, and we will then make our amendments.
Just, Mr. Chairman, can we request that they remain in the hall, in the public hearing room, so in case any of the senators have any sidebar questions?
Okay.
Because, I mean, we're going section by section on the proposal by the governor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few items. The first is there's discussion about trying to tap special funds to finance the costs of the emergency encumbrances for the storm. Now, I know that there's a desire for hard cash, but these encumbrances, we're not paying them immediately upon accrual, Mr. Byrne, is that correct? Like, for example, this spreadsheet here for the $144,000 in contractual, those should have all been purchase orders or encumbrances, not necessarily actual hard cash taken out of the bank and given to these companies.
They're not invoices yet, but I'm sure they'll follow pretty quickly.
Right, but I mean, typically it's net 30 on a payable basis. And so with that in mind, it's September 13th today. Aren't we expecting at least between about $65 million within the next 30 days to come into the general fund in actual cash?
You're talking of the Section 30 money?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And the reason why I bring that up, Mr. Chairman, is because if there's any apprehension towards tapping these special funds, the reality is that if we just give a general fund authorization for $1.5 million or whatever the final figure is the body decides, there is going to be general fund cash to fund that authorization. If in the event that that general fund cash that they used to fund that authorization would have been used for another purpose, we can always come back to the table and talk about tapping special funds at that time. But I think that there's just been some questions that were raised over the course of the discussion that kind of hinted towards the, well, I definitely have an apprehension towards using highway fund money and Healthy Futures Fund money for these emergencies when we really could just do a general fund authorization, and within the next 2 weeks, the cash will be there from the Section 30 money coming in. Then the highway fund money can remain intact. The Healthy Futures Fund money can remain intact in those special funds for their particular purposes to which they are intended, especially because we've raised taxes to raise those funds. So I just wanted to put that on the record for the members to consider. I also wanted to reiterate that I had a sidebar conversation with one of the members of the panel, and it was brought up that reimbursements for these expenditures can take 3 to 5 years. But if the emergency declaration is approved and we are authorized for the matching funds, those matching funds aren't going to take 3 to 5 years to come in. The match is immediate. And so there actually is value in waiting and not authorizing the full 3 million, maybe doing half of it, 1.5, and then waiting for this emergency declaration to kick in. Because in the event that it does, we'll get the matching funds immediately as opposed to taking 3 to 5 years for a reimbursement to come in. If in the event the emergency declaration is denied, and you know, we pray that it isn't, but if in the event that it is, it actually will put us into a very different posture, because then we'll have to really sit back and say, are we going to incur these costs entirely, or are we going to actually ramp down the guard as quickly as we can and really redefine what we're talking about in terms of emergency versus what can actually be done on a regular 8 to 5 schedule as opposed to having to accrue overtime, etc. So I just wanted to put all those things on the record that you know, there's a lot of different angles that we can be considering in this, and in light of that, I really appreciate the breakdown that was provided by Mr. Esteves, and I'm comfortable authorizing a $1.5 million amount, and then in the event that we exhaust that, they come back with another itemized expenditure report, and then we can reauthorize another $1.5 million. And Mr. Chairman, we were brought in here within the span of several hours over the course of this day, and I don't think that any member here would be objectionable to doing so once again with the added value of us being able to account for every single dollar that we've expended. But as of right now, $3 million is the projection based on full utilization. We have 93% of our island power restored as of recent news reports. I think that it might be more prudent for us to allocate lower amounts based on general fund revenues funded from Section 30 monies as opposed to tapping into these special funds and giving a full $3 million blank check authorization. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. Senator Esteves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to add to the input by the previous speaker. Something else significant is happening. The close of the fiscal year is coming up, so I'm very concerned with taking money. I understand it's cash on hand, and using it and utilizing it, especially when some of those funds are encumbered for FY19. Now, within 30 days, if they have the authorization for the appropriation to start to keep the recovery effort moving forward and emergency efforts moving forward, in 2 weeks, we'll have an idea of where the rest of 2018 closed out, whether we have other agencies that might have lapsed funds that don't have a recurring appropriation or are not encumbered for 2019 that we could probably potentially use to cover the difference of the $3 million with the appropriation. And so I understand we have 2 amendments we're looking at, but my recommendation to the body is that if we do look at a 1.5, that we look at just the revenue adjustment number based on information put out by the director of DPW on an approximately $1.4, $1.5 million in unused money. Now I understand, again, it's not cash on hand, but like with all appropriations and operations of the government, it's all based on estimates. And so when we have a clearer picture in 2 weeks of what it looks like, I believe that 1.5 should go a long way in terms of recovery efforts over the next 2 weeks. And as we have a clearer picture, we could potentially revisit for another 1.5.
All right, thank you very much. If there's no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and ask the panel to, if you can, go to the public hearing room and remain available in case some of the members have any questions. So with that, we're going to go ahead, and we were entertaining the proposed amendment that was proffered by Senator Rodriguez to increase the amount of the emergency fund from 1 million to 3 million. Where's the copy of the bill? Huh? No, that was section 2 of the bill. I misplaced my I need a copy of the bill. Here, I got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the amendment that we were discussing then was on page 2, line 2. The amount to amend was from 1 million to amend that to the amount of $3 million. So that's the first amendment. And then I have another amendment sheet that's going around that addresses the issue of the source for that $3 million, should it pass, and several other amendments that I'm proffering for the in the bill. So first, let's dispose of the amendment proffered by Senator Rodriguez to increase the amount from 1 million to 3 million. Senator San Nicolas.
Mr. Chairman, a motion to amend the amendment to 1.5 million.
Okay, so it's an amendment to the amendment to reduce the amount down to 1.5 million. Anybody want to speak on that? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I oppose the amendment to the amendment. I understand the need for us to scrutinize, just as we've done the past 4 hours, on what these projected expenses are going to be used for, and the source of funds that we would get these resources from. However, this is not a usual budget, this budget exercise that we're going through. This is an emergency situation. That's why we're here. And I think coming together as one community is something that we're all known to do when emergencies like this happen. Is something we need to do right now at this moment. I need to put everything aside and trust that the emergency, our first responders, and people that are in charge of ensuring that our island is brought back to some sense of normalcy, is provided the resources and the flexibility needed. And so I think we've heard, what could happen if Guam, if the president does declare Guam a natural disaster area, some things that kick in, the reimbursements. So we know what we can expect, but to limit it down to what we think based on what they're providing us now, I don't believe is the right response we should be giving. We didn't hear about the other needs of other agencies and other needs that our community is going to need. Public health just got their power back up today. I was speaking to some officials from public health earlier today, and they don't know to what extent some of their systems, some of their, some of the things that may have been damaged or jeopardized during the storm. And so these are things that they need to do further assessments on, and they'll be working with civil defense. And so, I believe it's a time for us to rise up to the table as well and provide the resources that they're asking, at least the authorization. There's a lot of items here in this bill that ensures accountability in terms of the reporting requirements. There's provisions here that ensures that if funds are not used within a specified amount of time, it reverts back or it doesn't move from the source it's from. So there's safeguards in here that I believe we should trust that everything would work out in a way where it will benefit our people. So I would object to that amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Castro? Okay. Senator Muñoz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too, like the previous speaker, object to reducing the figure. I just feel like us putting this amount is not telling them to go and spend $3 million. It's just giving them that opportunity in case the need arises. So I feel like in this emergency situation, there could be a lot of things that could happen between now and the finality of the recovery efforts. So I do believe that keeping it at $3 million is a good opportunity for them in case that need arises. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any others? Okay. Call for the question.
Mr. Chairman, may I close?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm not objectionable to providing $3 million, provided that we can justify the need for the $3 million and we can very transparently see where those funds are going to be expended. And I'm not coming from this position, Mr. Chairman, out of the blue. I was here when we got a request for $11 million for FESPAC, and we had to do it because it was an emergency. And I remember certain members, and I'm sure you can recall certain members getting very animated about why are we even questioning why we're not just giving this $11 million because this is an emergency. And it turned out that that $11 million was spent. We can see a concrete example of it right behind the Chief Kapua statue. And that's a case in point of how important it is for us to trust but verify that the amounts needed are going to be put to the highest and best use for the people of Guam in the context of the emergency that's being presented. There is no doubt that we've gone through a storm and that there are people suffering, but the $3 million that's being requested is in no way specifically going to ameliorate the suffering of those people. We have not heard a single statement from the panel that any of that $3 million was going to rebuild a home or replace any kind of lost items. What we have in this bill is actually a very artfully crafted slice of Swiss cheese that would allow for $3 million to be spent on a contract that is outside of our procurement process, and really the way this bill is written is outside of even the emergency provisions of our procurement process. Even the $1.5 million figure, Mr. Chairman, is based on a projection that even our own National Guard has admitted is worst case scenario, assuming we keep all 166 activated guardsmen on the field for the next 3 weeks. We are in recovery, but we're really ramping down quickly. If in the event that we don't need all 166 guardsmen, the general and his management expertise is definitely going to reduce utilization, And so the full 580,000 that they projected they needed is not going to be required. So where does the rest of that money go? How is the rest of that money going to be spent after it's authorized if there's a ramp down? With the way this bill is written, it can get punted off to any other contract that fits within the very loose parameters that's written into this bill. And after seeing how certain contracts went with FESPAC in very loose parameters, wherein there was very little accountability and a rush to fully fund based on an emergency, I've learned over the years, Madam Chairman, to really make sure that all the necessary parameters are in place for us to properly account for the people's money. If we go with the 1.5 figure that I'm recommending, and they come back to us with another itemized list showing where that $1.5 million went, and they call us into session the very next day or that same day and say, can we get the next 1.5 million? This is where the first set of funding went, can we get the next round of funding? I'm all for that. I'm not objectionable to funding the actual expenses of the emergency. What I am objectionable to is writing a check for $3 million for what could amount to be a $1.5 million need, and having a Swiss cheese type of bill that's going to allow for some lucrative contract to get doled out and someone to pocket a $1.5 million sweetheart deal on the backs of this emergency. Maybe 4 years ago, Madam Speaker, the public would have viewed my comments with skepticism, but it's actually been a proven modus operandi of this administration. And sadly, we need to be more mindful. And that's why, Madam Chairman, I'm asking that we're not saying no. We're saying let's dole out the funding in segments, and let's make sure first that this first round of funding that they're requesting for is fully justifiable before we give out the next round of funding. If you look at this itemized list too, Madam Chairman, you'll see that even the $250,000 that was spent on expenditures that are not going to be recurring. 25,000, actually in excess of 25,000, was spent on feeding the field personnel that were activated for the storm. That's a non-recurring expense. There's not going to be that many more feedings. The fuel costs, with the news recently of 93% power restoration, that's definitely going to be lower, not higher. And if, as power gets turned back on and services get restored, the need for more overtime is reduced, then where's the rest of that money going to go? And that's why the way this bill is written, the blank check of $3 million, it just raises far too many red flags given my prior experience. Let's support the recovery. Let's trust the request, but let's verify it first before we release the funding. It's the prudent thing for us to do, and that's our job here in Liheslatura. It's to manage the money and make sure that it's going to the purposes to which they are intended. So I humbly ask my colleagues to please support the amendment to reduce the sum from $3 million down to $1.5 million. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas, and we'll call for the question on the San Nicolas amendment to the Rodriguez amendment. All in favor?
Can you repeat the amendment?
All in favor of the San Nicolas amendment to reduce the amount of the Rodriguez amendment to 1.5 mil?
From 3 million?
From 3 million to 1.5 million. All in favor? Amendment fails. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you. I have another amendment from the source. I want to withdraw that amendment. in consideration of Senator Ada's amendment.
A point of order, Madam Chair, we're still on the $3 million amendment. He's
Are
withdrawing
you
that one?
withdrawing the $3 million amendment?
No, I'm sorry. So yeah, can we call for the question on that, the 3 million?
On Senator Rodriguez's amendment to increase the amount to $3 million, all in favor? Amendment fails. Senator Rodriguez,
Yeah, so I'm
you're
going to
recognized.
withdraw my earlier amendment.
On the source?
Yes.
And then I will recognize Senator Ada. You're recognized.
Madam Chair, the amendment that I wanted to proffer presumed that the emergency appropriation was going to be for the amount of $3 million. So now I'm going to need to change. I'm going to need to redo this amendment because the funding source for the emergency appropriation identifies special funds, but the amounts that I have here was for the $3 million amount. So if we can just have a
We'll take a
1
brief
minute recess.
1 minute recess.
Bienvenido.
Thank you.
The legislature is back in session.
So, Madam Chair, a new amendment is being passed, and the amendment amends Section 2 such that it increases it sets the emergency appropriation and authorization to $2 million, and it identifies the source of the $2 million. 1.5 million will come from the unappropriated surplus in fiscal year 2018 from the Healthy Futures Fund revenues, and up to $500,000 to be appropriated from the unexpended and unencumbered Guam Highway Fund revenues in fiscal year 2018. So that's I guess that's the first amendment that's being proffered in Section 2. That is the amount for the emergency appropriation of $2 million and the source of that. Further down in Section 2, in the second paragraph, addresses the procurement authorization, and we could probably address that after we have disposed of the emergency appropriation amount. Sorry?
So, Senator, you're going to take it in sections, so we'll just deal with the Section 2 for the first paragraph first?
Well, if the will of the body is to do it in one fell swoop, then we can do that too. So, if you'll allow me to explain the second part. The second part of the amendment to Section 2 basically removes the language notwithstanding the Guam procurement law. And basically, the amendment is saying that we recognize that during when emergency declaration has been made, the procurement law does have a provision that governs emergency procurements, and that's governed by Section 5215 in 5 GCA. And it does the same thing. It limits the amounts to be procured, services and supplies to 30 days. You only required to get 3 informal quotations. And so, but it will be better to actually cite a specific citation in the law that governs procurement. So that, Madam Chair, at least for Section 2.
Thank you. Senator Adams, let's take it actually we'll deal with Section 2 and then Section 3 and Section 4.
Yep.
So on Senator Adams' amendment to Section 2 of the bill, Senator Uggan and then Senator Esteves.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I have an amendment, and rather than writing it out, I hope you can follow me. Because it was brought up that there's $972,000 cash in the recycling revolving fund, and because approximately $400,000 is needed based on the disposition of green waste, which was $250,000 figure directly for DPW, and then $150,000 for the white goods and metallic waste disposition. So I would like to proffer an amendment to reduce the amount of the Healthy Futures Funds to $1 million, and then $400,000 would originate from the unexpended and unencumbered balance of the recycling revolving fund in fiscal year 2018. And that is cash, and representatives of the governor's office did mention that in fact there's $972,000 in there that could be used specifically for what the recycling revolving fund is mandated to be expended for, and that is the disposition of green waste, as well as the disposition and recycling of metallic goods and white goods. So, Madam Chair, that would be my amendment Once again, is to reduce the sum from the Healthy Futures Funds, which we all recognize is much needed by GMH as well as public health, to $1 million, and then an additional phrase of up to $400,000 appropriated from the unexpended and unencumbered recycling revolving fund revenues in fiscal year 2018.
Thank you, Senator Again. So that would give us a total of 1.4 instead of the 1.9 instead of the 2 million total. That we
Yes,
said.
Madam Chair, my calculator is working very well.
Madam Chair, may we take a 1-minute
Yes,
recess?
we'll take a 1-minute recess.
Thank you.
The legislature is back in session. Senator, any member wish to be heard on the Uggin amendment to the amendment? The Uggin amendment to the amendment to change the source funds for Healthy Futures Fund from 1.5 million down to 1 million, and an additional $400,000 from the recycling revolving fund balance. Any member wish to be heard?
Madam Chair, just a point of information, because I was asked to clarify the total figure would now be a cumulative amount of $1.9 million.
Any member wish to be heard on the Uggin amendment to the amendment? If not, Senator Uggin, would you like to close? If not, we'll call for the question. All in favor of the Uggin amendment to the ADA amendment? No objection? Any objection to the Uggin amendment? There's been an objection? All in favor of the Uggin amendment? Amendment fails. Senator Uggin, you're recognized. Senator Ada,
So then now we're back to the
Section 2.
Section 2, the original amendment, for the emergency appropriation amount of $2 million, of which 1.5 will come from the Healthy Futures Fund, and 500,000 will come from the unexpended Guam Highway Fund from fiscal year 2018.
On the ADA amendment to Section 2, any member wish to be heard? Senator St. Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, it's important for us to have a clear understanding of the mechanics of what this does versus what was utilized initially in the emergency circumstances. We do have a provision that allows for $250,000 to be expended when there's a state of emergency. That $250,000 is pre-authorized pending the declaration. When the governor declared the state of emergency, he was able to, he was authorized to expend $250,000 from the general fund. This amendment changes the nature of the way funding is handled for emergencies, in that it's taking from special funds and it's appropriating to pay for an emergency. Now, I'm of the mind, Madam Chair, that we should instead, if we're going to grant additional funding for emergency purposes, we really should just expand the authorization figure. So what was $250,000, we really should just expand it to 1.5 million or 1.9 million or 2 million or whatever the body decides is the necessary amount to cover what the emergency is. Because what happens is when we expand the authorization, then the governor can spend that from the general fund. Now what will happen is the general fund will have a shortfall of whatever that amount is. He can either transfer funds to make up for that shortfall, or after such time, he can come back and ask for an appropriation to make up for such shortfall. But right now, what this amendment will do is it will appropriate hard cash to an as yet undetermined cost. The 3 million, or in this case, the 2 million, that's all projection still. You know, we don't really know what the actual emergency costs are going to be. And so what happens if we appropriate this actual cash, this $2 million, and then the emergency costs come in at 1.2? The 800,000 would revert back to wherever it came from, or the governor would figure out how to issue an $800,000 contract within the parameters of this very loosely crafted bill. I don't mean to sound, I don't mean to to politicize what is being characterized as an emergency, but Madam Chair, this is an election year. Being able to give out an $800,000 contract in a very under very loose parameters is classic taxpayer spending for vote buying. And that's the risk that we're running by doing an appropriation versus an authorization. It's the risk that we're running in increasing these amounts to 3 million or 2 million. We run the risk of these funds being used in the context of emergencies, but actually not really addressing emergencies. And so that's why, you know, this is the people's money, this is taxpayer money. We need to be very, very cautious, given, you know, what we've experienced in the past with how we're authorizing the use of these funds. There is a very specific reason why cash is more attractive than an authorization. Because when you appropriate hard cash, you can give a hard cash check to a company and then turn around and knock on their back door and say, hey, by the way, I'm having a fundraiser. And they have the cash in the bank to be able to go and buy the fundraiser ticket. So I would prefer that we be very conservative. We seek to be responsive to what may be actual emergency needs, but we do so in a very limited scope so that we are mirroring the existing parameters of how we respond to emergencies, which is through an authorization, and we keep the amount as contained as possible, because we don't want this to turn into another example of oh wow, I wish we didn't do that. We don't know where these monies are going to be spent. Aside from the 1.5 million that was articulated here tonight by the panel, we don't know where the remaining $500,000 in a $2 million appropriation will go, or remaining $1.5 million in a $3 million appropriation will go. And it's incumbent upon us to know that. That's the whole reason why, you know, the appropriations or the authorizations are handled by the legislature, so that we can ask those questions and either have those answers or be very skeptical as to why we don't have them as we are continuously move forward in the process. So at this time, I'll object to the first part of the Section 2 that's being proffered. I do like the changing of the language to go back to the original emergency procurement language, but it's the tapping of the special funds, it's the utilization of the hard cash, it's the increasing of the amount to 2 million, and it's doing so in a manner that's inconsistent with what the normal process is, which is an authorization, not an appropriation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, what I'm hearing is that we should just, you know, it's as simple as increase the amount that is authorized for emergency spending instead of the $250,000 that's authorized, is to just increase that to the amount that's being requested, but simply to increase the authorization. What I'm concerned with is that to allow that increased amount to come from anywhere in the general fund, and you know, if what's, I guess the concern that I have is he could, you know, the governor certainly could take it from anywhere. Take it from DOE, could take it from GPD, whereas if we identify the exact funding source, then at least it gives me comfort that if we're going to take it from the Healthy Futures Fund, that's what's going to get tapped, and nothing else is going to get touched. I must admit that I really am disappointed. In fact, I'm even disturbed to hear the cynicism that's kind of driving the process here. The cynicism that if hard cash is made available, you're going to give it to a company, and then you knock on the back door. because it's an election year. And I just don't buy that. I have a lot more faith, and I guess maybe that's where, that's probably the fault that I have, is that I'm too trusting that when you give somebody the funds that they say they need to go out and address the emergency needs that we have out there, I trust that they will do that. And if it is not, if it is used for other purposes, then let him answer to St. Peter when he comes to the pearly gates. But we're not going to worry about that now. And so, Madam Chair, I just ask, let's act on this amendment, and let's give the $2 million that's being proposed by this amendment in Section 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Atta. There's been an objection to Section 2 of the Atta amendment. This first section of the Atta amendment. We'll take a 1-minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Any member wish to be heard on the Atta amendment to Section 2? Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move for the call for the question, please.
We'll call for the question. On the Atta amendment to Section 2 of the bill, all those in favor? Amendment passes. Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Chairman, so the second part of the amendment on Section 2 is it addresses the language of the procurement, and basically really removes the language notwithstanding the Guam procurement law, and the amendment is simply that emergency procurement of any necessary goods, materials, and services funded for in this Section 2 shall be executed pursuant to Section 5215 of 5 GCA. That particular section is a provision that addresses emergency procurement, and it limits how much services or materials you can purchase, that it should not be for more than 30 days.
I apologize, Senator Atta. It was my understanding that we were voting on the entirety of Section 2
Oh,
to
we did?
include, yeah,
Oh.
both.
So then that's taken care of.
Yes.
All right.
Section 3. Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Section 3. So, Madam Chair, Section 3 simply is a technical adjustment to the FY 2018 budget, so that it reduces the amount that was originally appropriated for the Guam Highway Fund. It reduces it by $500,000. So we're just making that technical correction, so to speak, to the appropriation amount in the budget to show where the $500,000 is coming from the Highway Fund. And so that's on Section 3.
Any objection to Senator Atta's amendment to Section 3? Senator Uggan, you're recognized. Any objection? Senator Espaldon? You're recognized.
Are we bifurcating these two amounts? Under section 3, he has two different adjustments, and I'm just asking, is he bifurcating?
So it's just the total and then the specific amount,
Okay.
and they're
I have
both
no-
listed in this section.
I have no objection.
Any objections to section 3? Hearing none, motion passes. Senator Atta? Oh, you objected? I apologize. There was an objection to section 3. We'll call for the question. All of those in favor of Senator Atta's amendment to section 3 of the bill, please indicate by raising your hand. Amendment passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the third amendment that I have is for section 4. Right now, they're saying that, well, the original, it changes and it requires that the funds that are being appropriated for the emergency condition should be encumbered within 30 days as opposed to 60 days. So if we truly have an emergency out there, as soon as this bill is passed, they should be out there getting the quotations that they need and encumbering these funds. Expending the funds is a different matter. That may take a little bit more depending on how soon the services can be provided or the materials. So we're just basically saying we have an emergency, get on it right away. I've spoken to the Mr. Steves there, and he says being able to encumber within 30 days is reasonable.
Thank you, Senator. Any senator wish to be heard on the ADA amendment to section 4? Any objection to the ADA amendment on section 4? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And finally, the final amendment that I offer is on section 8, to delete section 8. Section 8 talks about contracts entered into shall not exceed a term of 30 days. Well, if the emergency procurement follows the parameters of the procurement law, that section 5215, you really don't need that section 8 because that particular section of the procurement law says you can only procure services for a period of 30 days.
Thank you, Senator. Any member wish to be heard on the ADA amendment to section 8? Any member wish to be heard? Any objection? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Atta?
That's it, Madam Speaker. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Steves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment passed out to my colleagues. Should all have a copy. The amendment proposes to completely delete Section 7 of the bill, which currently reads, expenses beyond emergency appropriation. Any additional funding necessary for the recovery of Typhoon MANGKHUT shall require I Maga'láhen Guáhan to submit a detailed assessment of projected expenses to the Speaker of the Legislature for appropriation by this body. Now, Madam Chair, I don't believe this section is necessary. There shouldn't be any expenses in excess of the appropriation given, and it should go without saying that any requests or any additional appropriation that's going to be required should come with detailed assessments and projections just as part of good governance and the legislative process. So I don't want there to be any misconstrual of the measure being passed, that they have the authority to incur any expenses or encumbrances beyond the emergency appropriation level. So,
Thank you, Senator Steves. On the Steves amendment, any member wish to be heard? Any objection to the Steves amendment? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Steves?
That's all I have at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have an amendment that I'd like to proffer to Section 2 of the bill, and this would just to include language after, not sure which line this is, the 5th line, where it discusses the sources of the bill for expenses for civil defense, public safety, and health emergencies. I just like to include the language or farmers' crop damages pursuant to Chapter 64A of Title 5 Guam Code annotated. And this is just an amendment. You know, I understand that many of our farmers, for many of our farmers, a storm can be a really damaging event. It can be an economic death sentence for some of our small farmers. And it's really important to be able to address this issue now. Standing law dictates that the Department of Agriculture issues a report within 15 days of an event like we just experienced with the typhoon. And so we know that this information is incoming to our government. We will be able to assess the damage that any of our local farmers have incurred. There's also been a previous amendment to the bill that would increase the amount from the Healthy Futures Fund. And so it's my estimate that this would probably be about $250,000 that we're talking about. I know many times in this body we have discussed and encouraged our community to buy local, to support local, to eat local. And so this is an opportunity for us to really support local farmers in their, time of need. And we're also supporting small businesses and restaurants in addition to our farmers. It's also my understanding that this was done in 2015 following Typhoon Dolphin. And so I would just like to proffer this amendment to include farmers' crop damages as something that we can use this emergency funds for. Thank you.
Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly would like to support the proposed amendment. It's a direct recognition of many of our farmers out there who, in this particular case, I have not heard of any call out to the farmers providing the necessary information of crop loss. So I certainly hope that Department of Agriculture has initiated that process and that, in fact, within the required timeline of 15 days, it does not forego the requirement that they provide information to this body in terms of exactly what the anticipated cost will be. But inserting this amendment would allow for some of the use of these funds to be able to assist our farmers as they try to recover from the storm damage that was recently, that they recently experienced, also that may have affected some of their crops. So I certainly stand in support of our farmers, and I stand in support of the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If any other comments, Senator Esteves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I support the intent of the amendment, at least based on the testimony we received, I can't say whether or not I believe that allowing for the funding that we're providing if the bill should pass specifically for emergency operations, if allowing the money to also be used subsequently for losses or individual payments to any individual, because I don't even believe that the money that we're appropriating here, and we'd have to get clarification, directly funds housing initiatives. I think all of those recovery aspects is secondary to the primary focus of what this bill is, which is still ongoing emergency relief. I think that we could maybe come back to it once that assessment is complete and we have a better figure of what exactly we have to pay out. And considering that we didn't appropriate the full $3 million that was requested, we would have a better understanding of what funds have been already incurred or encumbered, as opposed to allowing the allocation right now in something that's supposed to be specific to emergencies, life, limb, eyesight, and in terms of protecting personal property. But in pursuant to the law, as I understand it, I think allows for funding to be made available for the loss of crops. And I think it's a bit too premature for that when the assessment hasn't even been completed yet. So I reluctantly would have to object to the amendment at the time. I think it would have been different if we had appropriated at the $3 million mark that was requested, using any fund balances for this initiative, but I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for an emergency appropriation at this time. Again, with the caveat that it would be different if we appropriated a higher amount or if we knew what the assessment was going to be and what the damages are.
All right, so there's been an objection to the Lee amendment. I'm going to go ahead and call for the question. All those in, yes, Vice Speaker?
Could you please clarify, the amendment that was passed out is different than what we're talking about, right? This one adds $250,000 to the Healthy Future Funds appropriation. So is the proposal that we're going to vote on now to, instead of appropriating 1.5 million from the Healthy Futures, to appropriate 1.75?
No.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a quick motion, notwithstanding the House rules, that we continue with our committee of the whole.
Yes. All right. I think maybe your question is being direct.
Are we voting on that?
No, the Lee amendment was to add to expand the farmer's crop damage as being eligible for funding under this emergency appropriation. That's her amendment.
Could you just read where the words would go then?
Can you read your amendment?
Sure. So on the line for expenses for civil defense, public safety, or health emergencies, and then the underlined section or farmers' crop damages pursuant to Chapter 64A of Title 5 Guam Code annotated, resulting from Typhoon MANGKHUT.
Okay, Vice Speaker. All right. So on the question of the Lee amendment, all those in favor? Oh, wait a minute.
Can I just ask one more question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Wasn't the question posed to a member of the panel as to whether this money would already be allowed to be used for that expense? I don't recall their answer, but I thought the question was asked.
Point. Was it asked?
It was, and it wasn't answered. He didn't have the information.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. I believe that the way that it was answered was that crop damages are usually paid for through the U.S. Department of Agriculture when the assessments are done. I believe that was the way it was presented in terms of the question.
Okay. Senator Hagan?
Actually, point of information, and it was highlighted by the proffer of the amendment that in 2015, right after Typhoon Dolphin, this body had to appropriate $250,000 to address, because federal assistance was not granted, the local community had to absorb that cost to our farmers and to be able to allow them to be able to reestablish their crops and their plantation. So in this case, it's taking a step further and looking at ensuring that some of the proceeds will be applied towards our farmers. And it was done in 2015 only because the federal authorities did not approve reimbursements to or compensation for our farmers.
Okay.
Also, point of information, Mr. Chair, that is, these farmers would be eligible for some of this USDA funding or, you know, federal funding if their crops are insured by USDA, but many of our local farmers don't have those options, so.
All right, call for the question on the Lee amendment. All those in favor of the Lee amendment, raise your hand. All right, amendment passes. Okay, are there any other amendments? Senator Rodriguez?
Mr. Chair, I believe that we exhausted everything. I'd like to move to rise in the committee of the whole with all the amendments intact and for us to immediately vote on the bill without engrossment.
Senator Nicholas?
Mr. Chairman, there's just, I know that it's late, but the amendment, particularly the one that you proffered, amending Section 2 and Section 3, are pretty substantial to the bill. I would be more comfortable seeing an engrossed copy prior to voting.
All right, let's take a 1-minute recess. Okay, so the motion has been made to rise from the committee of the whole with all amendments intact, and that after we rise, we will then vote immediately on the bill without engrossment. And so that is the motion. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, motion passes. Take a recess and we'll rise out of committee.
We ready? Oh. Assistant Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report back to the body that Bill number 1, parenthesis 10-S, was deliberated and amended in the Committee of the Whole, with a recommendation to place on the third reading file and to vote immediately without engrossment.
On the motion to place Bill 110-S on the third reading file and to vote without engrossment. Are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. We're in third reading. Clerk, if you could please read the title and take the vote.
Bill number 110-S, introduced by Committee on Rules, by request of I Maga'láhen Guáhan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam. An act to appropriate funds for emergency expenditures resulting from Typhoon MANGKHUT. Senator Atta. Senator Atta, aye. Senator Uggan. Senator Uggan, aye. Senator Castro. Senator Castro, aye. Senator Espadon. Senator Espadon, aye. Senator Esteves. Senator Esteves, aye. Senator Lee. Senator Lee, aye. Senator Morrison.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to motion to excuse Senator Morrison.
Is there any objection to excusing Senator Morrison from voting? Senator Uggan.
Madam Speaker, and also all other senators who are not present.
On the motion to excuse all the senators who are absent, is there any objection? No objection. Motion carries. They are excused. Proceed, Clerk.
Senator Morrison, excused. Senator Muña. Senator Muña, aye. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, excused. Senator Rodriguez. Senator Rodriguez, aye. Senator San Agustin. Senator San Agustin, aye. Senator San Nicolas. Senator San Nicolas, nay. Acting Speaker Terlahi. Acting Speaker Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, excused.
Bill number 110-S, as amended in the Committee of the Whole, received 10 ayes, 1 nay, and 3 excused. Bill 110-S, as amended by the Committee of the Whole, is passed by the Guam Legislature. We are now in, there being no further items in our agenda, we're now in brief extension of remarks. Is there any member who wishes to speak under brief extension of remarks? Assistant Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to adjourn this 10th special session.
On the motion to adjourn, is there any objection? We're adjourned. Subject to the call of the Speaker, or special session, we are adjourned.